Thank you. And I want to thank Deputy Sherlock for putting forward this motion on behalf of the Labour Party, and to thank all of the parties who have indicated their support for the principle of clean air and clean water. Clean air and clean water are fundamental essentials to a healthy human life. The Labour Party motion tonight is to stress, notwithstanding that the Taoiseach last week stood over there and said we were the third most advanced country in terms of the UN index. Yet we have neither clean air nor clean water because of the refusal of this government to actually implement serious change that would clean up our rivers and lakes and improve our water quality, and that would ban smoky coal. The list of the additional towns which are being added to the Smoky Coal Ban amounts to 156,000 people. And that doesn't come in, as the Minister knows, until next September. So we're laggards again in even implementing essential health measures. But the total number of towns not covered by the Smoky Coal Ban is 356,000 people. And I think we need to reflect about that. The people who live in towns like Dunboyne, in Arranmore, in Neenah, and other such areas right across the country. The 356,000 people that this government, Fine Gael, is showing the back of their hand to in terms of clean air and clean water. The town of I'm just looking at the list here, of Enniscorthy has a population of some 11,381 people. And that is going to be subject to the Smoky Coal Ban next September. But what about the town of Gorey? That has nearly 10,000 people. That has 9,822. So, it's wonderful to start cleaning up the air in Enniscorthy next September, 9 months later. But to bypass Gorey, I don't understand the Minister's reasoning, particularly when the regulations are exactly the same, but leaving 356,000 people behind is really bad. The government has shown really poor performance in terms of its management and organisation of the health service, notwithstanding that yesterday we voted for 17 billion, the largest ever health budget in the history of the state. Yet the government has, within its own remit, if only it could find the courage, the power to actually cut ill health figures and the waiting lists at a stroke by introducing a ban on smoky coal, by introducing clean air, clean water right across the major towns and villages in this country. And as I said, it's really difficult to know why Enniscorthy is in, but Gorey, with just roughly 1,000 people less, is left out. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense in terms of all those children who are suffering from asthma, as well as older people who have suffered from asthma all their lives, and the many people who will suffer late-age onset asthma in their 50s and 60s. And there'd be families all over the country listening to their children wheezing and trying to catch a breath tonight because it's so rainy and wet and miserable out there. And there'd be families listening to their elderly people, and the trolleys in the hospital, Minister, will be full of people wheezing and also suffering from various cardiac and COPD problems because your government, Fine Gael, refuses to act on this. What kind of cowardice? We're told that the government has legal advice, but they refuse to tell us in any detail what that legal advice is, or to name where the legal advice comes from. Is this the individual legal opinion sought perhaps from a single barrister? Or is this the direct opinion of the Attorney-General? I don't think it is, because if it was, you might have the courage to tell us a little bit more about it. As a former minister, and indeed for anyone that has served in government on previous occasions, we all know that advice comes in all shapes and sizes to governments, and if you want to, you can best seek out the legal advice that best suits your desired outcome. This is what the government seems to have done, because if the legal advice was as substantial as they suggest, I think they would have told us a lot more about it. We have evidence that the smoky coal used in Ireland is 4 to 6% sulphur, the most dangerous component in terms of air pollution and damage to people's health and lungs. We know there's a massive smuggling industry across the border to sell smoky coal, not just in the towns where it's legal, like Dunboyne, and will be in the future again, but to sell it right into housing estates all over the country. Those of us who campaigned in the recent by-election will know that in certain big estates you could literally put your finger up and actually taste the smoky coal in the air. But perhaps the Fine Gael people didn't do those kind of walkabouts in estates. So can I ask the Minister tonight, just get some courage and ban the smoky coal right across the country.
And can I ask First of all, I'd like to move amendment number 3 in my own name. First of all, I'd like to welcome the debate that has been tabled by the Labour Party. I think it is a very important debate, and it deals with a whole range of issues across the whole environmental spectrum. And I think it is something that I take very seriously, because there's no doubt that we have become much more aware of the huge damage that inadvertent consequences of behaviour are having across the environment. And we need to look at practices in industry, in farming, and indeed in the ordinary household and travel sectors if we are to correct this. And that has been, I suppose, the fundamental thrust behind the work I'm doing in relation to climate action. We need to look at how we source our power, because that has a huge impact. We need to look at how we heat our homes. We need to look at how we dispose of waste. We need to look at how licences that are issued by the EPA are observed. And I think the motion does raise a number of concerns about that I recognise. The EPA plays a vital role in not just overseeing regulation, but it also researches in the area of policy priority, and it is their reports that has drawn to our attention the areas where we need to act. It also supports local authorities, very particularly in relation to their responsibilities in enforcing against illegal dumping, which I know you, Cathaoirleach, are very conscious of from experience in our own constituency. So while the motion is very critical of enforcement, I think, and I recognise that enforcement must improve, I think it is only fair to say that the EPA is very active in the enforcement field. They have 1,500 site visits every year. They identify non-compliance in many of those visits, and they do prosecute and have been successful in prosecuting. They also have a risk-related approach to this and have identified sites of particular consequence, which are ones that they are particularly vigilant around. And they seek to encourage people to be compliant as well as simply enforcing and inspecting. And they have published their enforcement policy, which I think is a very significant assistance to people who want to be compliant but perhaps have fallen into practices that are leading them into non-compliance. So I think their work is to be commended, but I recognise the point made by Deputy Sherlock in his motion that there is significant room to improve these, and the EPA itself in its research points the way for those changes. As I say, in making climate action the core project that I've undertaken, we do address many of the issues that the motion raises by changing our waste patterns, and we have very poor waste patterns in many ways in this country. Half of the material that ought to be in the brown bin finds its way into the others. Those sort of things do damage to our soil if they end up in landfill, and they mean that product that could be recovered in the circular economy, as is cited in many of the motions, are missed. We're also committed to deliver 600,000 homes will have heat pumps over the next 10 years. 500,000 homes will have improved the fabric of their homes. 1 million of our vehicles will be electric vehicles. These will have a very significant impact on air quality in particular, but also on carbon emissions, which is one of our priority. The Deputy in his motion raises issues about, are these targets quantifiable? We are not only have we quantified them in the plan, but we will be producing a bill here, which I think the Deputy is supportive of the approach, which will see much better accountability framework for reporting in individual sectors and seeing exactly what is happening. I think the Deputy raises the principle of the polluter pays, and I think one of the things that I'm very pleased that I persuaded government to introduce this year is the carbon price. And we not only have a carbon price, but a trajectory for the next 10 years. So this is very much signalling to people that carbon does damage, carbon emissions does damage, and we need to start to exit fossil fuels. We need to make shifts. And this is the polluter pay principle being adopted, but all of the proceeds being ploughed back into helping people to empower people and their communities to make the changes that they need to make. As the Deputy has recognised, I have extended the Smoky Coal Ban to 13 additional towns in an incremental and proportionate basis. These are towns of a size where we have evidence of exceedance of the levels of air pollution, and I believe there's a very strong reason to act in the public interest to protect those homes and introduce the ban on smoky fuel. However, on smoky coal. However, to proceed with a nationwide ban, regardless of the circumstances, would carry a very high risk of illegality. And to reassure the Deputy, that is based on advice from the Attorney General, not from any individual. So, and the fundamental problem here is there is a freedom to trade across borders, and that's a fundamental principle of the European Union. And while it is possible to introduce restrictions on ground of public policy, that's only permissible where they're not being arbitrarily or discriminatorily applied to one product against another. And I think the essence of the difficulty here is that it would be very difficult to show that the particulate matter content of other solid fuels is higher than or is lower than that of smoky coal. That is the reality that we face. So if we don't move in the sort of incremental and proportionate and evidence-based approach that I've taken, we do expose ourselves to a high risk of illegality, and we have had an indication that that would be challenged in the courts. I think the consequence of such an approach would be to expose people in rural Ireland to a sudden ban that would stop them burning turf and burning blocks in their homes, something that they have been doing for many years. And I think deputies will be aware that people who are burning solid fuel in rural areas such as that are those who are at the highest risk of fuel poverty, and it would do significant damage to their ability to heat their homes. The alternative would be, of course, that it would undermine the basis of the ban that we already have, and we have if such a case was taken successfully, it would undermine the ban that applies to Dublin and to 26 other towns of substantial size. And I'm not willing to expose us to that risk. That's why I am adopting the incremental and proportionate way that I have set out. And to pretend that a nationwide ban doesn't carry the probable outcome for either the Dublin ban and the urban ban or for rural Ireland would be simply being dishonest to people, and I'm not willing to do that. The motion also raises other issues in relation to water quality, and I recognise that the recent report by the EPA is disappointing and shows water quality deterioration in some river basins. We have recently introduced a water quality strategy that's set out in the Government's River Basin Management Plan 2018 to 2021, and this does set out a comprehensive agenda to address this issue. And it is one that we need to pursue vigorously and will be pursued so. We also have to be very conscious that some of the sources of this are coming from farming and from wastewater discharges, and both Chagas and the Department of Agriculture and the EPA are working with agricultural bodies and farmers directly with free advisory services to help them improve the runoff from land that is causing some of the damage to water quality. We also, as you know, the Minister for Housing and Planning has, through Irish Water, 255 projects that have been identified that will improve water treatment in urban areas. 94 of those projects have been completed under the year to 2018. In addition, there is a marine strategy for clean and healthy, biological diverse sustainability use marine waters. So, I mean, the motion is so wide, it is very difficult to deal with the range of issues that have been raised in the 10 minutes that are available to me. I'm very conscious of the area of quarry licensing that has been exposed in a recent RTE programme. And while there is the legislation is there is clearly issues about need for more effective enforcement. And I think, let us be fair and recognise that there is the need for the courts to take such offences more seriously. I'm pleased to be able to tell the House that the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government will be engaging with the planning authorities to help them to develop more decisive actions. The final... I was going to comment on illegal dumping, but I'll get that another occasion.